Well, there's been a little bit of a break here, and we'll get back into the halachot of Brachot. Today we're going to start. We had to start talking about, if we're starting to talk about the halachot of Brachot, we start with the most important halacha of Brachot, which is the bracha of bread, the blessing on the bread. But we can't start really with the blessing of the bread just yet, because we don't go straight into eating bread. Rather, we have to have something that precedes the eating of the bread, which is Netilat Yadayim, washing of the hands. Now, the mitzvah of washing the hands, doing Netilat Yadayim means washing of the hands, before eating bread, it's not one that was founded by the Torah. It's actually one of the rabbinic laws that were mandated. According to the Torah law, if a source of tumah comes into contact with a person's body, his entire body becomes tameh, and the only way to purify himself would be to immerse in a mikvah. And back then, when they were more stringent and they were more careful with all of these laws of contamination and purification, then it would be a big issue if you became tameh, if you became impure. But the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim was instituted by our sages. They invented the concept because they wanted it to be possible for someone's hands to become teme'od by coming into contact even with a minor source of tumah that would not necessarily contaminate their whole body. And so the idea of Netilat Yadayim was something of a novelty. It was a chidush. It wasn't something that would have otherwise been implemented by the Torah itself. Now, the Rishonim offer two explanations why our sages found it important to wash the hands before eating bread. Rashi explains in Masechet Chulin that it's because the Kohanim, when they lived in Eretz Israel and they lived in Israel, they ate terumah. Terumah is a special source. Is a special portion of produce, of crop, of bread that we give to the Kohanim. Now, Turma can be eaten only by a Kohen, and only if he is tahor, he is cleansed, he is pure. And therefore, he would always need to make sure that his hands were tahor. And since if a person's hands become tameh, they become impure, therefore, if he touches the food before he eats it, then on that level, when he was a Kohen would eat Truma, he would make it impure. So Truma produce could become Tameh even from a minor source of Truma, meaning even if a person's hands were even on the lowest level of Truma, they would still be able to make it impure, make the Truma and the Truma impure, and then they would be in a problem. The second reason given by our sages, that's specifically on the Kohanim. Now, the rule emphasizes that the Kohanim need to stay away and guard their hands. But our sages demanded that all Jews, meaning not just the Kohanim, also the Israelim, the Levi'im, they need to wash their hands before eating bread. And the Lavush and Arav Zalman, we're quoted in the Mishnah Berurah, they added that even though in our times that it's not possible for any Kohen to eat Truma, that's why we take the challah, when we take a portion of the bread, when we're doing separating the challah, we burn it. Technically, we're supposed to give it to a Kohen, but since we're all impure, so if you go give it to a Kohen and he touches it, he can already make it impure. Therefore, there's no institution, there's no teruma, there's no challah. Yet, nonetheless, the institution of washing your hands is still in force today. The second reason that the sages give is that, according to the Tosfot, that they say in order to sanctify the mundane act of eating, we should go ahead and purify our hands before the actual act. So the Ramban wrote that the practice of washing our hands regularly is one aspect of the commandment of you must be holy. Hashem said you must be holy because I'm holy. And so, in order to do that action, we go ahead and we wash our hands before eating bread. Some sages, the Talmud actually brings down that Shlomo HaMelech was the one to institute the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim. He also instituted the mitzvah of eruvin, like the eruv that we have. That was both instituted by Shlomo HaMelech. And the institution was specifically on bread. Now the Levush explains why specifically on bread, because he quotes Rabbeinu Yonah that our sages instituted the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim for eating bread because back then Truma was mainly bread. There was mainly grain, and then they would give it to the Kohanim as bread. And so, since generally the main source of Truma was bread, therefore you have to go ahead and we do it as a commemoration of that. So this is for all breads. When we're talking about washing the hands, it's all for all breads. And we'll see not just breads, but we'll see there are other types of breads that we have to do Netilat Yadayim for. So according to the Torah law, that back then Truma was only allowed to be given from the 5 grains and from grapes and olives. And so because of that, Truma was primarily separated from those types of fruits. And therefore, when we're remembering that we're doing it as a basis of Truma, it's specifically on bread. Now, a lot of people might think, okay, it's not such a big deal. It's just a rabbinic ordination. It's just a rabbinic decree. So it's not too bad, right? That's not correct. Okay? The Shulchan Aruch states that anyone who does not do Netilat Yadayim properly, or anyone who belittles the mitzvah, or they don't take it, as we'll learn, some of the halachot, they don't take it seriously. The Shulchan Aruch writes, anyone who doesn't take it seriously deserves excommunication, and that this sin of not taking care to properly wash your hands before you eat bread, it's the main cause of poverty that befalls on a person. And if he continues to belittle the mitzvah, he will end up being uprooted from this world. So we see the severity of not taking it seriously. So B'ezrat Hashem, as we learn these halachot, we'll make sure that we take them seriously. The Sefer HaGilgulim, he states, which was authored by the Ma'archu, quoting the Arizal, that if someone belittles the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim, again, he doesn't take it seriously, he's liable to be reincarnated as water. His soul will come back into this world as water, and someone will have to do Netilat Yadayim on him to rectify his soul. So it's a midah keneged midah, measure for measure. You didn't take the Netilat Yadayim seriously. Now your only source of coming back is coming back as water in order to have Netilat Yadayim done to you. That way you can rectify yourself. So again, we see the severity of not going and doing Netilat Yadayim. On the other side of the spectrum, that if someone does do Netilat Yadayim and they do Netilat Yadayim with a lot of water, they will merit ashirut. They will merit rich and wealth. So you got both sides. Not only if you do not do the mitzvah of washing your hands, you will fall to poverty. But also on the other side of the spectrum, if you do it, you will become wealthy. So it's good on both sides. They actually say if you take the first letters of Al Netilat Yadayim, you spell out the word Ani. Al Netilat Yadayim is Ain Nun Yud Ani, which is a poor person. If someone does not take a care to do the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim correctly, then the sages say he will become poor. So when is one obligated to wash their hands? Okay, so we'll see if someone wants to eat bread. Okay, someone wants to do hamotzi lechem min haaretz, and and there is water available. So at that point, he has to wash his hands with water before he can go ahead and make hamotzi lechem min haaretz. This is the rule, even if he knows that his hands have not become tameh in any manner. Since nowadays we don't really know what even is tameh, we even just going into the bathroom or even just scratching our head is enough to already mandate the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim. Even if someone plans to eat bread without touching it with his hands, he says, you know what, I'm going to be a chassid, I'm going to be very stringent, I'm going to eat with gloves. Or maybe he was in Siberia and it was too cold, so he said, I'm eating with gloves. So he goes, he eats with the gloves, and what happens? He says, I'm not touching the bread, so I don't need to do Netilat Yadayim. That's wrong. As long as you are eating bread and there is water available, you will have to do Netilat Yadayim, even if you're not touching the bread with your hands. Some people eat pizza with a fork and knife. Okay, so they say, why do I need to do Netilat Yadayim? I'm not touching the pizza. Is there anything wrong with it? Right? No, there is something wrong with it. Because even though you're eating with a fork and a knife, who says that you might not come to touch it? And so in these situations, even if you have no plan on eating them, you should go ahead still and wash your hands with Netilat Yadayim. Now, there are certain times when you don't have to necessarily wash your hands, depending not on the bread itself, but on the size of the bread. So if someone is planning to eat less than a kazait of bread, less than 27 grams of bread, so he's technically exempt from the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim. Maran in the Shulchan Aruch wrote that some poskim ruled that if someone eats less than a kazait of bread, he's exempt from washing his hands. And so therefore, we're choshesh on those some poskim, and we're saying that safek brachot lakel, you don't have to do with the bracha, and you don't even have to do. Okay? Now, of course, if someone wants to do it, he can go ahead and do it, but of course, without a bracha. But the halacha is if you're not obligated to do it. So if you're eating, let's say, a salad and it has some croutons, okay? Now, even though we're going to see that you have to say hamotzi on the croutons, okay? You're not exempt from saying hamotzi lechem min haaretz on the croutons, but you do not have to wash your hands with water. And that's, of course, if those croutons are baked, and we'll get more into the idea of croutons b'ezrat Hashem as we talk more about the halachot of kazait, of the halachot of bread. So if someone's eating less than 27 grams, he can go ahead, eat the bread without washing his hands. Of course, he would still have to say hamotzi lechem min haaretz before. What happens if someone wants to eat between a kazait and kabitza? He wants to, usually by seudah shlishit. This is where it usually occurs. Seudah shlishit, you've already eaten 2 meals, you're so stuffed, you're saying, another meal? I can't even, I just processed the first meal, now you want me to have another meal? So they said, no, you don't have to eat a full 54 grams of hamotzi, you can eat maybe like a loaf, 27 grams. You say, okay, that's fine. What does everyone usually do? They get that little loaf, 27 grams, they go and they wash their hands, and everyone says, Al Netilat Yadayim. Whoa. Who said you can say Netilat Yadayim, Al Netilat Yadayim? When do we say Al Netilat Yadayim, the blessing of Al Netilat Yadayim? It's not every time we're going to wash our hands. Rather, our sages told us that if someone plans to eat a kazait of bread, but it's less than kabitza, so it's between 27 grams and 50 grams, he must recite do Netilat Yadayim, but he must not recite the blessing of Al Netilat Yadayim. So he should wash his hands, but without a blessing. And so, even if someone is going to eat a kabetza, but what happens sometimes is that he's a very slow eater, so that by the time it takes him to eat a kabetza, it's spanned beyond the time of 7.5 minutes. 7.5 minutes is what we call kedei achilat pras. It's the general amount of time that it takes to eat a loaf of bread. And our sages said that's around 7.5 minutes. So now a person eats very slow. He has that 50 grams of bread, but he's very slow. He eats one bite and then he talks to his friends. Another bite, says Divrei Torah, right? Baruch Hashem. He eats another bite, starts singing songs, Shabbat. And then by the time he gets to the to the last bite of the 50 grams, what is he? He's past that 7.5 minutes. So now, after that 7.5 minutes, he's entered a new 7.5 minute interval, which is not connected to that previous 7.5 minutes, meaning he has not eaten a kabetza in 7.5 minutes. Okay, so ideally, this doesn't invalidate your blessing. So if you did on Netilat Yadayim, you haven't said a blessing in vain because you intended to eat kabetza. It's just to know that you should try to eat the kabetza, that 50 grams of bread, in 7.5 minutes. And similarly with a kazait. In order for you to eat a kazait, one should eat it within 7.5 minutes. And so if you're going to, and this is going to be more applicable when we talk about the after blessings, that you have to make sure that you're eating your kazait, your shi'ul of 27 grams, the measurement of 27 grams, within 7.5 minutes. If not, it's not connected to the two parts of the eating. Now, what happens if someone planned to eat kabetza? He had a 50-gram loaf of bread. He started eating it, and then he said, "Oh man, I'm so full. I can't do it. I can't finish it." Now, he already said al Netilat Yadayim. He already blessed al Netilat Yadayim when he did his washing of the hands, because he thought that he was going to eat at least a kabetza, at least 50 grams of bread. He knows the halacha. He says, if I'm going to eat less than 50 grams, between 27 grams and 50 grams of bread, I wash without saying al Netilat Yadayim. But more than 50 grams, then I know that I have to do washing of the hands with al Netilat Yadayim. So he went to the washing station, washed his hands, said al Netilat Yadayim, sat down, took a couple bites, and then realized that there's no way he's finishing the sandwich. It's too big. 50 grams, what was I thinking, right? And it's not just, 50 grams of bread. You also have maybe like a hamburger or a bun. I don't know what you have in there. But at the end of the day, what do you see? You're saying, I'm not going to be able to finish it. What's the halacha? I already said the blessing. Maybe it's a blessing in vain? No, we do not say it's a blessing in vain. Why? Because when he intended to do so, he intended to eat a kabetza. He had that loaf of 50 grams, and so he knew that he was going to eat 50 grams. He was going to eat a kabetza, meaning to say that he intended for the blessing to be appropriately apportioned to that bread. But in actuality, it didn't end up that way. That's beyond his control in this sense, and therefore he has not said a blessing in vain. His blessing is fine, and he shouldn't push himself. You should not push himself to eat, because that's called achilat gasa. That's not a good eating. Nevertheless, he should attempt to avoid this situation. So if you know you're going to be eating less than 50 grams, you can go ahead and wash your hands, but not have a blessing. Do not bless with that Netilat Yadayim. So we'll talk about the delaying of washing of the hands. So there is a shiur, a zman, a time interval between washing of the hands and blessing on the bread. Okay, and we're going to see that there's the Ramah. He said it's around. It takes I think he says it's around like 22 seconds that you should go between washing of the hands and saying the blessing on the bread. Usually, especially on Shabbat, when you have a big table, so we usually go according to the head of the table, the one who's actually going to be doing the hamotzi, and therefore he should be the last to go ahead and do the hamotzi, because he's going to be the one to validate the blessing on behalf of everyone. Therefore, even though they might be waiting a little longer, he should be the one to be the last to do Netilat Yadayim, so he can be the fastest, get that time interval. Now, even though if someone does not make it within that 22 seconds, nonetheless, it's still a valid blessing. He does not have to redo the Netilat Yadayim, and he does not need to bless on the Netilat Yadayim. He's good to go, and he can go ahead and say hamotzi. Or say examples of things that are equal to this amount of gram. So generally, if you take like a tortilla, usually the tortilla, regular size tortilla, it's around, if I'm not mistaken, it's around like 50 grams, 55 grams. So those that would be the shear of a kabetza. I know they sometimes have like the smaller tortillas. I think those smaller tortillas are around like 30 grams. So again, if you ever need to wonder what that is, you can always look on the package. Sometimes they'll tell you how many grams per tortilla, or per usually the actual pitot and the loaves of bread, they're usually more dense, and so they're a lot more, they weigh a lot more. So the Or LeTzion ruled that if someone plans to eat a full meal, including a kabetzav bread, he may not taste the bread at all before washing his hands, because the kabetza is going to be the thing that validates the blessing. So if you go ahead and you eat, then you wouldn't be able to validate the blessing of al Netilat Yadayim. So all these laws of Netilat Yadayim apply both to man and woman. When we say that women aren't obligated in positive time-bound mitzvot, the mitzvah itself is bound by time, meaning that there are times of the day that you're obligated, times of the day that you're not obligated, times of the year that you're obligated, times of the year that you're not obligated. With Netilat Yadayim, it's not bound by time, it's bound by the person who wants to eat bread. So if he wakes up in the middle of the night and he says, I want to eat bread, well, you have to go do Netilat Yadayim before. If you want to eat in the morning bread, you have to do Netilat Yadayim before you eat the bread. So since it's not a mitzvah that's necessarily bound by time, it's more bound by the person. Therefore, we do not classify it as a positive time-bound mitzvah, and women are also obligated in these mitzvot. Now, as we'll talk later about, maybe in a month or so, there are halachot that is called ikar v'tafel. Ikar v'tafel, as we'll just mention it right now, is that I have a primary food and then I have a subordinate food. Now, the reason I'm eating right now is for the primary food, but I'm going to use the subordinate food as a balancing act in order to mitigate that primary food. So, an example, if I have a very spicy food, right, I eat the very spicy food, and so what happens? I enjoy it, that's what I wanted, but then I need something to balance it out. So I take a piece of bread and I eat it. Okay? If someone does it in that situation, in order to neutralize either the taste of a spicy food or something very sweet, and it's a subordinate, meaning the bread is only being eaten, why? To balance out that very spicy taste. At that point, he does not need to perform Netilat Yadayim, and the same and even more so, he does not even have to say the blessing of Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz. Again, we'll talk about these halachot more in detail of the Ikar and Tafel when we get into it. But just so you know, if someone's eating bread as a subordinate food, meaning he's eating something very spicy or very sweet, and he needs to balance out the taste, he takes a piece of bread just to simmer down, to calm down those spices. As long as he's not doing it as a ikar, he doesn't want the bread, he's just doing it as a secondary to the spiciness. At that point, he does not need to do Netilat Yadayim, and even more so, he would not need to say Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz. Now, when we're saying that one needs to do Netilat Yadayim on bread, it's not only on bread, as we mentioned earlier, that there was also the 5 grains were used when giving truma, and since the 5 grains were also truma, were given as truma, they were also obligated in the mitzvah of al Netilat Yadayim. But there's a difference, there's a caveat. With lechem, which we say Hamotzi Lechem Min Haaretz, then we say above 50 grams, he needs to do Netilat Yadayim with a blessing. As we said earlier, 27 to 50 grams. He does so without a blessing. With cooked grains, baked grains, cookies, cakes, sambusak, all of these different types of kind of baked products, then if someone eats more than 216 grams, then he is liable to wash his hands with a bracha. So if someone plans to eat this amount of grains, then he would have to go ahead and wash his hands with a blessing. When does this usually happen? I don't know to everyone, but sometimes they have the borekas. The borekas are either filled with cheese or sometimes with potato, and so sometimes you might have one, and then have another one, and then have another one. Next thing you know, you finished a whole platter of borekas, and you said, whoa, what happened? Maybe I need to do an al Netilat Yadayim. So in that case, if he knew that he was going to sit down and eat 216 grams of these borekas, then he would have to done Netilat Yadayim beforehand with a blessing. Not only do we say that Netilat Yadayim should be done in situations like this where you're dealing with grains, but also if fruits or vegetables that they come into contact with water, then one would need to perform Netilat Yadayim before eating it. Okay, so there we'll talk about it in a second, but we need to we'll see in a second that these are also items that one would need to do Netilat Yadayim on, of course, without a blessing. What if someone is in a rush to go get to work? Does Netilat Yadayim take a bit of his bread before having to rush to the car to start driving? He takes the bread with him in the car since he left the house, but took the food with him. Does he repeat? So in that situation, if someone is, for example, they're going out to work, they knew that there's not going to be any Netilat Yadayim stations, so they said, what am I going to do? He says, you know what, I have an idea. I'm going to do Netilat Yadayim beforehand. He does Netilat Yadayim. He takes a sandwich. He says, "Amotzi lechem min haaretz," takes a bite, puts it back in his backpack, goes out to work, and then he gets to work and he wants to finish the sandwich. Does he need to repeat the blessing on the sandwich? So in this situation, since the person intended not to eat the sandwich, in the house, he either intended to eat it in the car or in the place that he went to. So in that situation, he does not need to repeat the blessing of Hamotzi, as long as he is careful. Let's put it. We finished that. Okay, he does not need to repeat the blessing, but he needs to be careful not to contaminate, quote unquote, his hands. And we'll see again in the next coming halachot. What does that mean? Meaning, for example, you can't scratch your head. If you scratched your head while driving, then you need to go ahead and wash your hands again. Netilat Yadayim. Again, we're going to see that is also without a blessing. So the best case scenario in that situation, especially if you're going to eat the bread later on, is maybe just to wear gloves. And then we'll talk more about that in a bit. As we mentioned, women are obligated in the men equally. Women are obligated in the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim equally as men are. It's important for parents to train their kids even when they're young to learn the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim. So even when they're 4 or 5, teach them already Netilat Yadayim before going ahead and eating bread. As we mentioned, it's a very important mitzvah, and therefore we should not take it lightly. When someone performs the mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim, he should have in mind that by washing his hands, he's preparing his hands halachically to eat the bread. Meaning the hands, of course, we're washing our hands, and you should wash your hands for cleanliness, but also spiritually cleanliness. And so when a person is going ahead and he's washing them, we need to have some sort of intentions that what we're doing right now is for the sake of eating the bread. If one person pours the water on another person's hand, say that you have back then they had like servants, and so they would, and sometimes the people do this on Pesach. One person comes and they pour the water on the hands of everyone at the table. That the halakha demands that at least one of them have in mind that they're washing their hands in order to prepare to eat the bread. As long as either one of them, and the person himself, right, when he's washing his own hands, needs to have this in mind. You need to make sure that you're coming to this mitzvah not as they told me No, you have to understand what you're doing, right? We're not in kindergarten anymore. we're coming to first grade. We have to realize that what we're doing isn't just if they wanted you to wash your hands, go ahead, wash your hands with soap. Why do we need to do 3 times? Why do we need a kli, a vessel? No, of course there's specific intentions, and therefore we need to make sure that we're paying attention to this. If someone washed his hands in the identical manner as Netilat Yadayim requires, but he had no intention to eat bread at that time, so he must redo Netilat Yadayim when he decides to eat bread afterwards. This is, of course, if in the meantime he might have been involved with other activities, and therefore he wasn't thinking about his hands. If one went ahead and in such a case he washed his hands one time and then did other activities, and he wasn't sure now if his hands are still clean, not clean, did he scratch his head, did he go into a bathroom? In those situations, we say savek brachot lakel, and he does not have to go ahead and repeat the blessing. But of course, it is best that he first, if you want to be, according to all opinions, if you want to make sure that you do recite a blessing, then you should either touch your skin underneath your clothing, you should scratch your head, touch your feet, touch your shoes. In those situations, you would be liable again for Netilat Yadayim with a blessing. So I do not have to pull my vehicle over and wash hands out the vehicle window, or try and do this as a passenger travel with a cup. So we're going to see again these halachot are as we go on, that if you're going to be washing your hands at home and you're going to be eating, then and you're making sure your hands are clean throughout the entire time, then you can rely on that washing of the hands to continue eating your bread. Now, if you're on the way, you're traveling, you've left your house, you don't know, you probably you put your shoes on, you probably touched your skin, you're underneath your clothing, the covered part of your bodies, you scratched your head, whatever it may be. And so now, how are you going to continue eating the sandwich? So in those situations, you would have to find a place to wash your hands, or if you have a spare bottle in your car, you would have to pull over and wash your hands if you want to continue eating the sandwich in order to continue doing that. So we're going to see again, and of course, if someone's not sure, then you can always go ahead and contaminate your hands on purpose, and then require yourself to wash your hands with Netilat Yadayim. Halacha brura, he said that in a case that a person he wants to recite the blessing of Al Netilat Yadayim, so he can go ahead and render his hands impure on purpose, and then perform Netilat Yadayim a second time with the blessing. Normally, we say that it's forbidden to make a blessing that is not needed. We say that you shouldn't go ahead and put yourself in a position that it is that you're adding blessings, that you're saying blessings. Let's say you can easily avoid that. But in this case, it is permitted, since there are poskim who ruled. There are some sages that ruled that he must recite the blessing of Al Netilat Yadayim, even if he did not contaminate his hands. Merely just not thinking about his hands and safeguarding his hands is enough to make him liable. So because you have that opinion and you're going ahead and you're contaminating them on purpose, there is good shitot that say that you can go ahead and you can contaminate your hands and make yourself liable in the blessing. If I got on an Air Canada flight to UK and I find that the kosher meal is a sandwich, can I use the water bottle over the bathroom sink, or am I out of luck because it is in a bathroom? We'll see in a bit. Usually, we'll allow it to be in the bathroom in that situation. The best advice would be to do it kind of like in the airport beforehand. But of course, like you said, you sometimes get the kosher meal is with a sandwich. So in those situations, we'll see that you can use the bathroom stall, and of course you wouldn't say the blessing in the bathroom stall. You'd have to go outside of the bathroom and say the blessing there of Al Netilat Yadayim, but you would be able to use it. So after performing Netilat Yadayim, as we mentioned, that you have to watch, make sure, remain aware that you do not impurify your hands. Now, usually we say that, okay, it's, again, we don't usually go too far, and we try to minimize the amount of time between washing our hands and eating the hamotzi. But, especially on Friday night, when people are waiting for the head of the household to go ahead and and do the hamotzi. So what happens is, people start to play around, they do little jokes, they try to make the other person laugh, and what might happen? They might either touch their shoes, they might touch, they scratch their head, they might touch a covered part of the body, and at that point, your Netilat Yadayim has been nullified. You have to go again and do a second Netilat Yadayim, but in this situation, you would do it without a blessing. So one would need to make sure to guard his hands when performing Netilat Yadayim from the time that he finished Netilat Yadayim until the point where he blesses. Okay, at that point, we're going to see later on also you have to still continue guarding your hands, and so we're gonna have to talk about that later on about guarding your hands throughout the meal as well. We'll see that wipes on the flight, wipes in general, do not cleanse the hands. Again, if this was specifically for cleanliness only, then go ahead, take, you can even take, hand sanitizer, do this, right? But that's not the issue. The issue is not a physical issue here. It's not only a physical issue here. We're talking also about a spiritual issue, and since the hands are spiritually contaminated, the only way to uncontaminate those is through water, and so it would have to be specifically water that is the medium to get rid of that spiritual impurity. Therefore, has to be water. So if and we'll see what happens if you're not going to find water. Let's say you're traveling on a plane, okay, and there's turbulence, and now it's going to be impossible. They say the next hour and a half, you guys can't get out of your seats. Turbulence. So how are you going to eat your sandwich? You're hungry. Okay? So we're going to see later on that there's a certain amount of distance that we have to look for traveling either forward or backwards. So the distance that you're going to travel forward to, meaning if you're going forward, let's say you're driving on the highway and you just passed the first stop, those rest stops, and it says the next rest stop in another hour and a half. I guess if you're going at 60 miles per hour, let's say it's another 90 miles. Okay, so the halacha is that if you have a rest stop or you have a opportunity in front of you that's within 72 minutes for meal. Okay, 72 minutes is around 4 meal, and so if you're going to reach water in 72 minutes, if you keep traveling forward, you have to wait until you get to that water destination, or that destination to do Netilat Yadayim, to eat your sandwich. So you would not be able to eat your sandwich if they say that the turbulence is going to last for the next hour and you really want to eat the sandwich now. Wait until that hour. If they're going to say that turbulence is continuing onwards, we'll see what you have to do then. But if they tell you, okay, that's it, then go ahead, wash your hands, and you're good to go. That's if you're traveling forward. If you're traveling backwards, okay, meaning if I just passed a rest stop, then the halacha is if it's 18 minutes behind me, one meal behind me, then I have to go back and get the water there and do Netilat Yadayim there. So on an airplane, I'm not really going to go backwards. I'm only going to move forwards. So that's only with going forwards. We're going to see is a cracked nagelvas, is a cracked vessel, is that going to be kosher? There's going to be different types of cracks that we're going to look at. We'll maybe bring in some examples. And it depends where the crack is located. And Mizrat Hashem will talk more about that maybe next week. But just a simple answer is it depends. Okay, I'll give you a Jewish answer. It depends. If it's a cracked nagelvaser, it depends. Where is the crack? How's the crack? It's it seems something so simple, but of course it's a little bit more complicated. So before we talk about the vessel itself, how many times do we have to do Netilat Yadayim? Right? So the Maran and the Shulchan Aruch, he said if someone pours a rabbit of water on each hand at once, then it's not necessary to pour on them a second time. So you've been told your whole life that it's 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Comes the Shulchan Aruch, he says, no, what are you talking about? You can do rabbit of water, which rabbit of water is 3 ounces, 81 milliliters. That's not a lot. You put 81 milliliters of water, apply it on each hand at once. So I take a little, it's like a shot glass, not a shot glass, maybe a little bit more than a shot glass, 3 ounces. I pour it on one hand, okay, good to go. Pour it on the other hand, good to go, according to the Shulchan Aruch. Other poskim ruled that you need to do it a second time because the water on the hands is still, you need to wash off the water on the hands. Okay. Comes the Arizal and the Rashash, and they say, no. Again, if you're talking about physical cleanliness, okay, maybe you do it one time, but we're talking spiritual. We're trying to rid our hands of this spiritual contamination. So what do they say? As we all know, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You need to pour 3 on the right and then 3 on the left. And even if one had poured revi'it of water, he poured that 3 ounces, 81 milliliters on that first spritz, that first washing, nonetheless, you have to do it another 2 times, and then you pass it over to the other hand, and you do Netilat Yadayim with that another 3 times. Now, how we do it is we always give precedence to the right hand. That's why we do blessings with the right hand. We try to put our right shoe on. We try to put our our clothes on the right side. If you ever see clothing of Hasidim, of the specific, if you ever look at Jewish clothes, for example, we always buy our clothes so our clothes are a little bit backwards, right? But in actuality, if you look at the Hasidim, their clothes, they put the right side over the left side. Our button shirts, they have the left side, the right side under the left side. But we always give precedence to the right, so it really should be the right over the left. When we hold our hands, we should have our right hand over the left. We always give precedence to the right. So if that's the case, so the proper procedure is to pick up the washing cup with your right hand, pass it to your left, fill it with water, pour 3 times on your right hand. Do not pass it back to your right hand. Place it down on the table or on the counter or on the sink. Then let go of it with your left hand. Grab it with your right hand. Fill it up. And then 1, 2, 3 on the left hand. The reason for that is, again, we want the right hand to be in control. Right always represents chesed. It represents kindness, loving kindness of Hashem. And so if the left is giving, the left is deen, the left is gvura, it's judgment, it's punishment. And so we don't want the left to be giving to the right. We want the right to influence the left, but not the left influencing the right. Now this is specifically, we usually use this procedure when eating bread or in the first thing in the morning when you wake up. At that point, you do 3 on the right and 3 on the left. When you come out of the bathroom, for example, so when you come out of the bathroom, then at that point, people do alternating. So you don't have to do 3 on the right, 3 on the left, rather you do alternating. So when you come out of the bathroom or when you touched something that's unclean, in order to cleanse your hands in that manner, you do once on the right, once on the left, once on the right, once on the left, once on the right, and once on the left. Okay? And that's also in the morning. So in the morning also, when you wake up, that's the proper procedure. The only time we do 3 on the right and 3 on the left is specifically for bread. Even if a person is left-handed, right, he should pour first 3 times on the right and then 3 on the left. Again, even if a person is left-handed, so his dominating hand is the left. Nonetheless, in the Kabbalistic aspect of what this represents, we always want to give precedence to the right, even if a person is lefty. Therefore, he should pour on his right. When performing Netilat Yadayim, it's necessary to pour water on the entire wrist, up until the wrist. So you see some people be very stingy with the water. They'll put a little bit of water up until their knuckles, but the obligation is up until the wrist. That means the whole hand needs to have gotten water on them. Some poskim rule that it's not necessary to do the entire hands. It's only up to the knuckles. But today, since we have an abundance of water, there's no reason why we should be lenient in that act and not go to the wrist. There's some times during the year, for example, Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, on those days when we fast and we're not allowed to bathe ourselves. So we'll see the halakha there is that you should preferably wash your hands in the morning up until the knuckles. But when you're eating bread or when you're especially when we have an abundance of water, you should make sure to go until the wrist. Now, not only do you need to make sure that you're pouring it on your hands, you need to make sure that your hands also get wet, right? What do people usually do? They do 1, 2, 3, and now the water is on the top part of the hand. Well, what about the bottom part of the hand, right? So you need to make sure that the whole hand gets washed. So you want to make sure that maybe when you're washing and mid-wash, you turn your hand, you do one on the top, one on the bottom. Make sure that the whole hand is wet in order to make sure that, again, we're trying to sanctify our hands. And if you're only going to do it on one side, then what have you done? If someone decides to make it his regular practice that he's stringent, he says, I'm going to be machmir, I'm going to be stringent, I'm only doing up until the wrist. And he says it almost like a neder. He doesn't take a neder, he doesn't take an obligation, a vow upon himself, but he says that I want to be stringent upon this. Then if one time it happens that he does not follow that stringency, it's fine. He can still make the blessing. That's not big. It's not an issue. As we mentioned, if someone does wash up until his wrist, until his knuckles, then there are poskim that say it's fine, and so he may recite the blessing of Al Netilat Yadayim, even though it's best to do it until his wrist. So we said that the Rabbi of water, again 81 milliliters, 3 ounces, is the minimum. Now you want to make sure that that is the amount of water minimally that hits your hand. So if someone is not going to go ahead and let's say you're washing your hands, but you didn't even want to take a Rabbi of water, that's going to be an issue, and therefore we want to make sure that we're filling up the vessels. Usually most of the vessels that we have nowadays are more than 3 ounces, so there's nothing to worry about. The Gemara mentions that Rav Chisda, he said that someone who he would wash his hands with fistfuls with a lot of water, and heaven would bless him with a fistful with a great amount of good things. So you see, it's a measure for measure. Someone who uses a lot of water for the Netilat Yadayim will become wealthy. You'll see some people have a tradition to overfill the vessel, again, to show that they are wanting overfill of wealth, overfill of bounty. There's a custom that brought down by the Arizal and the Rashash, also a kind of Kabbalistic approach, that after you wash your hands, you do 3 on the right and 3 on the left, then you rub your hands against each other. I've seen some people rub against kind of like this 3 times. Some people go and kind of rub the whole hands like this 3 times. That's a good thing to do. It doesn't need to be done, but that's what was followed by the Arizal and the Rashash. So therefore, one should wipe his hand 3 times on the right, 3 times on the left, after washing his hands. Again, technically it's not necessary, but it's a good thing to do. Afterwards, the Arizal says, the next part of the procedure is we take our fingers and we hold them out in front of our head. The Arizal says that the 10 fingers are at that moment of time like 10 tubes, and they are receiving the bounty, the sustenance from heaven. And so when we bring them in front of us and we say the blessing of Al Netilat Yadayim, we are bringing down all of that bounty, all of that shefa, all of that positivity into our lives. And therefore, we want to make sure that they are pointed outward in front of our faces. The sages say also that the reason to do that is so that any of the water doesn't fall upwards, it falls downwards onto the bottom part of the hand, so that if there was any times that we were doing Netilat Yadayim, that it was maybe the first time, it wouldn't fall onto the upper part of your hand. So best thing to do is to raise them and then say the blessing. We say the blessing of Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al Netilat Yadayim, even though we said that it's a biblical, it's a rabbinic law. It was mandated by our sages. Nonetheless, we say that it is Asher Kiddishanu. It's something that Hashem has commanded us. Once our sages say it, then it's as if Hashem has said it, and therefore we need to make sure that we fill it to the letter of the T, and we make sure that we're saying that Hashem, even though it was not from the Torah, right? Nonetheless, we give it the same stringency as a Torah mandated law, and this is because the Torah mandates us to listen to our sages. So the sages tell us to do so. Even though it's a rabbinic enactment, nonetheless, listening to our sages is a biblical act, a biblical commandment. If one hand is covered in a bandage or a cast, so it's only possible, you can only wash one hand, right? So at that point, you go ahead and you wash with one hand. I guess you got someone else to wash your hand for you. You would pour 3 times on that one hand, and you would recite the blessing of Al Netilat Yadayim. Even though Yadayim is plural, Yadayim means hands. Nonetheless, we're going to say that we do not change the text of the blessing, and in a person in that situation who has to go ahead and wash his hands for Netilat Yadayim in order to eat his bread, eat his sandwich, eat his pizza, and therefore he would have to say Al Netilat Yadayim. Now, it's interesting with regards to the Netilat Yadayim. Normally, we say that a person recites the blessing before doing the mitzvah. So, for example, when I'm going to do the mitzvah of lulav and etrog, so I have to first say the blessing, and then I pick up the lulav and etrog. If I'm going to eat a sandwich, so what do? I first say the blessing, and then I eat the sandwich. The mitzvah of Netilat Yadayim, first you do the act of Al Netilat Yadayim, and then afterwards you do the blessing. The sages give a couple of reasons for this. One of the reasons is that your hands are dirty beforehand, and how can you say a blessing if your hands are dirty? If you're contaminated, how can you go ahead and make a blessing? Therefore, you would need to wash your hands first, and then say Al Netilat Yadayim. They say also that the mitzvah of Al Netilat Yadayim is only performed after they are washed. So technically, by washing them, before washing them, you can't say that you've done the mitzvah, and so you go ahead, you wash them, and then you go ahead and you dry them. At that point, once they're dried, then you've completed the mitzvah. So technically, you've said the blessing as you were doing the mitzvah. Now, what happens if someone got very caught up in a conversation? They were talking, they did Netilat Yadayim, they were caught up in thought, they dried their hands, and now they realized, wait a second, I forgot to do Al Netilat Yadayim. So if someone failed to recite the blessing of Al Netilat Yadayim until after he had dried his hands, it is no longer possible to recite the blessing. Okay? And so we say there are a bunch of sages that say at the point that you've dried your hands, that you're no longer allowed to say the blessing. And so we say, Safek Brachot La'akel. And so even though according to the Rambam and most Rishonim, including the Maran and the Shulchan Aruch, if someone would recite this blessing after he had dried his hands, it would be a blessing in vain. Even if he realized his mistake in less than a second after he dried his hands, we say that he's no longer allowed to recite the blessing. Now, if someone, so that therefore these are the Sephardic Achonim, and we hold like them, Shulchan Aruch, Rambam. So if someone dried his hands and he forgot to say Al Netilat Yadayim, he has to go ahead and just continue on. Shouldn't say the blessing. You've lost the opportunity to say the blessing, and therefore we say Safek Brachot La'akel. You cannot go ahead and say the blessing. If someone began drying his hands, but before drying them completely, he realized, hold on, I didn't say a blessing, right? And so at that point, if he realized before finishing the drying process, at that point he may recite the blessing of Al Netilat Yadayim. Until he has completely dried his hands, he is not allowed to go ahead. Once he completely dried his hands, at that point he's no longer allowed to recite the blessing of Al Netilat Yadayim. If someone performed the Al Netilat Yadayim, and this guy, again, he was very caught up, and then he went to go sit down and start the meal, and then he said, wait a second, did I bless? Did I say Al Netilat Yadayim? He turns to his friend, because the people don't talk. They can't talk after they're doing Netilat Yadayim, as we'll see. So he says, you heard me? Did I do it? I says, I don't know. You don't know if you don't do your own blessing? You know if you ate lunch, but you don't know if you said a blessing. What's more important? People know that you ask a person, did you eat lunch today? They'll answer in a second, yeah, I ate lunch today. You ask a person, did you do a blessing on Al Netilat Yadayim? Oh, I don't know. I don't remember. How don't you remember? That's more important than the lunch. Okay, but he doesn't remember. Okay, so he doesn't remember if he said Al Netilat Yadayim, but he knows he washed his hands. At least he's half good. Okay, he knows he washed his hands, but does he remember the blessing? No, he doesn't remember the blessing. He's unsure. He doesn't know if he recited the blessing. So at that point, again, we say Safek Brachot la'akel. He may not recite the blessing, and he is allowed to go ahead and continue eating. Of course, this applies even if he didn't completely dry his hands. Since we say Safek Brachot la'akel, meaning that it's a Safek. I'm in doubt. Did I say the blessing? Did I not say a blessing? At that point, you would say that a person should not go ahead and recite the blessing. So I guess always make sure if you said the blessing or not. Okay. Some people have the custom of reciting a special verse. Su'idachem kodesh uvarchu et Hashem. Raise your hands in sanctity and bless Hashem. Just before reciting the blessing of Al Netilat Yadayim. While some poskim said that this is a hefsek. This is problematic. It's an interruption between the act of the mitzvah and the blessing itself. Nevertheless, there is a solid basis to say that it's permitted, and you should not go ahead and protest anyone who is doing that. So if you see someone start saying blessing, don't throw a shoe at them yet. Just let them do it. Afterwards, you can ask them, where did they learn this? If they say they have a credible source, you say, okay, fine. But it's best if you say, oh, this sounds like a very nice custom. No, you should refrain from this practice, because we try not to interrupt between the mitzvah and the actual blessing. Okay, Zat Hashem will continue next week, and again, Netilat Yadayim seems something very, very minor, something that's not so nogea. It's something, okay, we just go ahead, wash our hands, say the blessing, and then we can go ahead and eat bread, right? Seems something very, very minor, but nonetheless, there are quite a bit of halachot with this, and Bezrat Hashem will continue next week.